morning. Welcome all of you to the online seminar on sustainable development and innovation. It's my great honor to be here with you today to exchange ideas, share challenges, and foster sustainable development. Let me also thank the UNDP and NIDA for supporting this public administration dialogue. Special thanks to Mr.Renaud Meyer, UNDP resident representative, without whose commitment, this special event would not be possible. My name is Dr.Thanaporn Tengratanaprasert, lecturer, Graduate School of Public Administration. I'll be your moderator for today. And let me also introduce our panelists, Dr.Gorn Huvanandana, lecturer, Graduate School of Public Administration. Ladies and gentlemen, today we will look at what underpins successful sustainable development and innovation, what works, what doesn't work, and what can we learn from each other, and also to highlight areas where public sector efficiency and sustainable development might be further improved. Well, throughout the world today, exponential technology are rapidly changing our lives and our societies. We need to adapt our skills to these dramatic trends. This transformation brings countless opportunities to improve well-being, from healthcare to education and to environment. Disruption has become the new normal, and we cannot afford to fall behind. And so what can we do? The good news is we have Mr. Renaud with us today to share international best practices regarding sustainable development and innovation. On this occasion, may I request the UNDP resident representative, Mr. Renaud Meyer, to deliver his lecture, please.
Thank you very much, Kun Thanaporn. Let me just, before I start, double check that you can hear me well.
Sure.
Excellent. Okay, so it looks like technology is with us this morning, which is not always the case on Monday mornings. So wonderful. Thank you so much, NIDA, for having me and partnering with UNDP for this webinar. It's only one aspect of our collaboration and partnership with NIDA, and we're very pleased that over the years, our two organizations have been holding hand and moving forward together on the pathway of Thailand on sustainable development. And I think we have with you a very, very good and solid partner. And I look forward to continue this engagement, even if unfortunately this morning it has to be through video screens in UNDP, where we put people at the center of our work and of our development objective. We of course much prefer face-to-face interactions. They are always much richer, but we understand that with the current context and the prevention measures that are still in place, despite the excellent record of Thailand in managing this pandemic on the health aspect, I think we need to remain prudent. So we welcome this online webinar, and welcome also, the webinar being an example of this, how we are not just, kind of pressing pause and waiting for the pandemic to come by and hopefully go away. Work continues. The lives of the people we all know have been very severely impacted in Thailand, around the world. Most countries, it's of course the health situation that prevails, but I think here in Thailand, it's more the social-economic aspects of this crisis. It is impacting very severely on Thailand, and Thailand's advantages, if we can say, of openness. It's the importance of international trade and the relationship between Thailand and the rest of the world when it comes to the economics, tourism industry, and the wonderful hospitality of the Thai people and the country to millions of tourists. Let's not forget that Bangkok is the most visited city in the world by tourists, and Thailand is among the top 10 destinations for international tourism. Well, obviously this has stopped fairly dramatically, And we can imagine the consequences on GDP, on income of people, and so many millions of Thai that rely on those industries. So it's very important that we continue the work despite this situation, so that we can learn, from the pandemic. And innovation, has been very much on the headlines over the past year in many aspects, and we'll come to this. I know Nida has been very generous in time and giving me a whole hour for this lecture. I do not intend to use the whole hour because I think it's always very difficult to keep an attention span to online discussions. So I will try to remain very dynamic in the way that I deliver my ideas and our thoughts in UNDP. But I look more forward to an interaction with the panel and a discussion around the issues. So I'll try to go through my few slides that I have prepared to illustrate also what I will say. And let me try now to share with all of you the screen. And I will ask also a confirmation on your side if you can indeed see the presentation.
Yes.
Okay, let me put this in. Okay, can everybody see it? Yeah, can you just confirm?
Yes.
Okay, wonderful. So, the concept of sustainable development, and I think this graph really captures what it is. It is not a new concept, right? It has been at the core of the development paradigm for decades now. But I think, again, COVID-19 highlights its relevance, right? And I'm sure many of you are very familiar with this graph. I hope you are. We call this the 5 Ps of sustainable development, not the vegetable, obviously, but the 5 Ps because, and the story goes very, very easily to understand. We start with the green and we go towards the right, clockwise. So we live on a planet, right? And it is in a way our home. And this is important, remember this, because I will come back to this. It is our home, we the people, right? And I use the first few words of the UN, the preamble of the United Nations. We the people are the guests of this planet, and we live. There is an increasing number of us, obviously, and it's increasing very rapidly, as we know. And here in Asia, we have the biggest concentration of population. We all strive for prosperity. I mean, this is something that is in us, irrespective of our culture, irrespective of where we live, even irrespective of our income. Prosperity is something that we strive for, but it has consequences, right? We know that on a resource-limited planet, this quest for prosperity is obviously something that brings complex situations. The dream of so many people, looking at it, zooming at it from a Thai perspective, this concept of going shopping to Paragon on the weekend and having a collection of 15 credit cards, all for different things that give us discounts and rebates and 5 baht of this, 5 baht of that, the coupons. I mean, all those little symbols that really today are a bit the signature of a society where consumerism is very much driving the behavior of so many people, so much that we tend to close an eye at best, if not being completely still ignorant of the consequences of this race for consumption. This race for consumption, when we have billions of people on a planet competing for scarce resources, obviously brings conflict. And this is the 4th P, peace. Peace, which is very often threatened, very much challenged all over the world. Unfortunately, we know that the world today is on a path that is actually going downwards when it comes to peace and democracy around the world. Just look at the neighbor, for example. It was on a positive trend until recently, until just 2 weeks or 3 weeks ago. So peace is certainly a key element of this whole equation around sustainable development. And very often students would hear of the nexus, right? There is no peace without development. There is no development without peace. one of the solutions to a lot of the problems that I've just enumerated is, of course, collaboration. It's partnership. And this is why the circle around sustainable development, the 5 Ps, finishes with the 5th P on partnership. Absolutely crucial. Collaboration. Collaboration in respect of differences, collaboration in a constructive spirit, win-win solutions leading to consensus making sometimes. This is a key concept and a fundamental. And this is why among the key principles, the concept of how do we ensure that, from the creation of the UN, which is an acknowledgement of the need for a global multilateral governance system where nations can talk to each other, but also to the need for government to exist. And something that, of course, is at the core of what NIDA teaches on the need for public, right? The concept of public goods, the concept of public management of resources, because we want it to benefit peace, we want it to benefit prosperity, we want it to benefit people, and ultimately it has to benefit the planet, right? So this is really a concept that I think is both complex, but actually quite simple, because there is a very nice narrative around the circle of the 5 Ps, which is not only very easy to remember, but also very easy to share irrespective of your target audience. You can, use it like a little children night story. Once upon a time, there was a planet that was occupied by many people, et cetera, et cetera. And, I would encourage all of you to do this, because it's fundamental that we reach as many possible, right, on the importance of this circle, which is at the core of the mandate of UNDP, but I think at the core of what drives many of us when we want to engage on development and public policy matters. So the international community, has espoused this concept of sustainable development, is at the center, and of course has come up with an incredibly powerful, in my view, framework, which is the Sustainable Development Goals, right? The 17 goals. I am not going to present them here today, because I take it, maybe wrongly, I hope not, for granted that many of you are much aware of the 17 goals of the Agenda 2030. They were approved in 2015. They're running till 2030. They are, as we all know, an extremely ambitious agenda for the global community. And, unpacking them, the one thing that I always say when I talk about the SDGs is it's probably the only reference framework. I have never, ever met anyone telling me that they are against the SDGs, right? The SDGs are first and foremost an aspiration that we all share for better, right? Irrespective of the sector. We don't want any poverty, we want better income, we don't want to be hungry, we want to have good health and affordable health care, we want to have access to good education, we want clean water, we want a clean air to breathe, we want a beautiful environment to be able to fulfill, we want to fulfill our rights, our human rights, right? Our dignity, and we want to have a quality, accessible, non-corrupt justice system in case we need to settle grievances. So, all the values, the concepts that are at the core of the 17 goals of the SDGs, including going back to what the point of partnership, goal 17, right, on the need to forge constructive and positive partnership among different forces in society. All this is very much captured in this SDG. Thailand has been a champion on the SDGs. Several government agencies are leading, Ministry of Foreign Affairs, of course, but also NESDC, which is the custodian, the National Economic and Social Development Council, which is the custodian of the Agenda 2030 and the SDGs in the country. There's not a single day where I do not talk about the SDGs with our government counterpart, but also with our business sector counterparts, with our civil society friends, with students and school children around the country. I talk about the SDGs here in Bangkok, of course, but I also talk about the SDGs in remote provinces around the country, explaining that this is not something that people just have to wait for the SDGs to be delivered from Bangkok. It is everybody's business to contribute to the SDG. The premises of volunteerism, which is so strong in Thai culture, is very much needed, again, when it comes to the achievement of the SDGs. So a very important concept that needs, of course, to be localized, right? That also needs to be planned, mainstream, integrated in the national set of development frameworks, and to a very large extent it is. If you look at the 20-year strategy of Thailand, if you look at the current NESDC plan, the one that is being drafted now, the 13th one, if you look at most reference frameworks, even in the Ministry of Finance or in the Bank of Thailand, when you talk to them about sustainable financing, right? All this is very much in line with the SDGs. So that is very reassuring, because sense of common purpose, sense of common direction is extremely important. The big challenge that still remains in Thailand, in my view, is how do we push this agenda at the community level? Right? How do we really build the ownership of the SDGs, not only at the level of institutions and organizations like ministries and state agencies, and even to some extent big corporates on the private sector, but how do we make people understand that at the level of the community, in a village, in a district, even in a family setting, in a small and medium-sized enterprise, in a micro enterprise, how we can make them understand that the SDGs is not something that we need to force feed them, that it is a reference framework that they can use and should use for themselves as a guide, should also use as an accountability mechanism to the people that are above them, right? The mayor that they have elected, the provincial authorities that they have elected last December, their members of parliament that they have elected in 2019, right? Hold the government accountable, hold businesses accountable for more responsible production, for less carbon heavy ways of fabrication and production. So this is a very important tool that I would want everybody. I always joke with my colleagues. I make them believe. I say I make them believe. It's not true that I have an SDG wheel tattooed on my shoulder, right, as a reminder that this is really an important framework of reference for our work in development. Now, it's very important to appreciate that this is not something that we just, pulled out of a hat on a morning in 2015, right? This is what I was saying. The concept of sustainable development dates not of yesterday. There's a whole, process that went in the elaboration of the 17 goals. It started with our common future, a very important landmark report, also called the Brundtland Report, named after the former Prime Minister of Norway in 1987. See, so that's what, 40 years ago, right? It will soon be 40 years. Well, not quite soon, but a good 15 years ago. So 35 years ago. So this is a concept. I don't want to say old, because extremely relevant, right? When you say something is old, people go like, I don't want to know about it. No, it's extremely relevant, and it has gone through those milestones. The Rio Summit that was echoed again in the Rio +20 in 2012, right? Of course, the Millennium Declaration at the turn of the century, and already then the formulation of 8 Millennium Development Goals, right? That was a completely new concept that for the first time in the history of mankind, we were able as an international community to come with 8 issues that had global full consensus. Right? That is a remarkable achievement of the global community, where we are so diverse in so many different ways, but we managed to convince the member state to sign on the Millennium Declaration with 8 common objectives. First time in the history of mankind. And then we reached 2015, and this is the famous wheel of 17. We went from 8 to 17. And it's not just like, 9 new issues that came up, but when you look at the nature of the goals, right? People usually agree to say that the MDGs were just like a pilot, right? But the SDGs is really, is really the issue. Why? Why do we say that? Because when we were trying to get consensus around the 8 goals, we went for the low-hanging fruit. Right? We went for mostly social issues that nobody disagrees with. Right? Who does not want good education, good health, equality between gender? Right? These are issues that are very much universal, extremely rights-based. Right? So there's no question about it. Right? But we did not mention peace or governance or human rights or climate change. All those issues that require much more discussions and debate, right? And we were able to do this 15 years later in 2015 with the adoption of the Agenda 2030, because the global, the global community was much more mature. And I think we had proven that we were successful, not everywhere, but at the global level, we were able to deliver on the MDGs. So, spinning this in a positive way, I say, if we're able to do this, let's be more ambitious, right? And this is what the Sustainable Development Goals are. If you do a quick comparison between on the left side of this chart, the Millennium Development Goals, and on the right side, the Sustainable Development Goals, right? We can see the thinking is very different, right? The MDGs were mostly for developing countries. It was still, under this premise that the rich countries can tell the poor countries what they have to do and what they have to achieve. Whereas the SDGs are different. My own country, France, is struggling to achieve the SDGs. Look at the UK, right? It is struggling to achieve the SDGs. And they also have to, and we are also holding them accountable, right? In many ways, Thailand, in some areas, going back to COVID, on public health management, is way ahead of many developed countries from Europe, and not to mention the United States, when you come, to the SDGs on goal 3, right? So it's really a global consensus, which a much more equal footing, I believe, in terms of accountability and ambition. The 8 goals of the SDGs, I mentioned them, were siloed, were very specific, and it was good because we needed to prove that it was a proof of concept, if you wish, right? To use an innovation concept, right? Whereas the SDGs are much more ambitious, right? 17 goals, 169 targets with indicators for each of those targets. So a much more rigorous approach to holding, member states accountable on achieving the SDGs. The MDGs were created by technocrats. It is true, right? At the time, I was actually in New York in the UNDP headquarters, and friends of mine were on this commission that were locking themselves up days after days and coming up with the 8 goals. Oh no, let's not be too ambitious. Oh yeah, but let's remain meaningful and relevant. It was technocrats, and those technocrats were able to convince the Secretary General at the time and the member states to adopt the MDGs. Amazing. But that's not how it should work, right? Ownership is critical when you try to be ambitious, right? So the SDGs were negotiated by member states. 3 years of consultations around the world that started in 2012, right? That led to thousands of consultations, surveys, discussions, focus group discussions in New York, but also in all the countries around the world, right? I think it was called The World We Want. It was a massive survey online, right? Because by then we had social media, right? Which we didn't have, earlier on. So we used that, of course, right? And so the SDGs were really defined by member states for member states. And that also explained, in my view, why they are so much more successful. On the means of implementation, they were fairly simple and rudimentary during the first MDG period. On SDGs, they're much more rigorous again, right? This concept of common but differentiated responsibility that is at the core of the climate action negotiations, for example, right? These are new concepts where we say, we all share the same problem today, but we are not equal in the origin of the problem, right? Nevertheless, we need to find solutions to solve them because they are affecting everyone. Right? So this, very quick presentation shows the ambition, but also the complexity, right, of sustainable development today. 3 key messages that I would really want to leave with you, beyond knowing what the SDGs are. The first one is the universality. I think this is fundamental, right? It is really the reference framework that unites every single individual on our planet. It applies to everyone, and it applies to everyone anywhere, right? Irrespective of who we are, of our contribution to society, from the farmer in Isan to the CEO in a big bank on Sukhumvit, right? Everybody, it's relevant for every one of us, and we all have a contribution to make, very universal. The second point is fundamental. It is all about integration. I will come back to this, because if we don't understand this, then there's no chance of achieving them. they are absolutely in need for integration. We cannot look at them as, cut them in slices. This is not a cake that you cut in 17 pieces and you run away with your piece. Right? It doesn't make any sense, because by the time you come back, the pieces will all have different shapes and won't fit in the same cake. Right? So it is all about something that we need to keep in mind, almost like a compass. Right? We can be flexible in prioritization of the SDGs, for example. Right? You can decide that, in a given community, water is what the problem is, more than access to justice, because they've just opened up a new court, right? In another community, it will be different. It will be the issue of the school is too far. And right now, that's what we need. There's an influx of kids. So we need more school. And then we put, I don't know, there's no industry, so the issue of SDG 9, for example, is maybe less relevant, right? So there is flexibility, and I will demonstrate this in a minute. They are completely interdependent, and therefore an integrated approach is absolutely critical. And the last one is the most inspirational one, right? This is not about milestone, step-by-step progress. This is transformative. This is going to change our world if we achieve them. The planet will not be the same. And this is really critical for the next part of our comments about when we talk about why innovation is so critical. This very quick slide is about this interdependence, right? I think it shows that the minute that you start acting on one SDG, right, be it a positive action or a negative spoiler, it will have an impact on other SDGs, right? Therefore, the idea, which many countries have taken maybe by simplicity, and going back to governance issues, right, of splitting the responsibility of an SDG to a given ministry, for example, and asking this ministry to report 1 year later on the homework that they have done vis-a-vis this specific goal, right? We understand, but it's not sufficient. Right? There has to be a sense of commonality. There has to be a coordination mechanism. There has to be an integration process that will bring all those results and all the progress that various agencies and government ministries do, and it has to be brought in. Right? This is why the role of MFA and NESDC in the Thai government structure is so critical when looking at this integration. This is why even in the UN system, the Secretary General and the General Assembly have asked UNDP not to focus on a single SDG, but to be the integrator, right, of the SDGs. When specialized agencies, WHO on Goal 3, UN Women on Goal 5, UNICEF on Goal 4, they have a more clearer mandate, right? But we also need to bring them all together in an integrated fashion. So to recap this first part of my statement and the message I want to leave with you on sustainable development and innovation. The SDGs are ambitious, clearly, right? It's not going to happen tomorrow, and it requires efforts, funding, collaborative spirits to be achieved. They are multisectoral, which in a way also means that everybody is involved and needs to be involved. All segments of society, all member states. They are fundamentally interdependent. Right? So it's a package. It's not 17 slides that you can cut away. We know that achieving sustainable development is complex. Right? I've shown you the path that the global community has taken to come with the concept of sustainable development. Right? And this is not to talk about our world. There's only that much that we control, right? And we know that it remains an increasingly unpredictable world. I'm sure you've heard the famous expression of VUCA, right? We live in the VUCA world, volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous, right? This is absolutely the reality. Who would have thought a year and a half ago that 2021 would be 2020, sorry, would be so disastrous? All plans, you can rip them off and throw them because COVID is coming. Who could have predicted that? Right? To me, COVID is just the perfect example of this unpredictability of the world. And yet, this is where it's very important. We need to have the humility of appreciating that we are very much responsible because the more we have an impact on the world in which we live, we are also part of the problem. We also create many new sources that put together bring this unpredictability. So this is a key message that I want to deliver. We believe in UNDP that COVID being the tip of the iceberg, but we believe that we are looking at a shift of geological era. Right? This is very fundamental. A geological era that is called the Anthropocene. It's a bit of a complex word in English, and I don't know how it translates and if it translates in Thai, but the Anthropocene is basically the age of humans. It's quite simple to understand, and it goes back to the 5 Ps. I started with the planet. This is our home. This is where we live. And we people live on the planet as guests of this planet. And we cohabit on the planet with nature, with wildlife, with oceans, with air. We have grown quantitatively, qualitatively so much that our impact on this planet is now actually defining the interrelations of this planet. We have flipped upside down the relationship. We have taken the planet hostage to our search for prosperity, for our consumerism. We have completely derailed natural rhythms, acidification of oceans, global warming, the hole in the ozone layer. We are disrupting. Dr.Thanaporn mentioned this in her opening remarks. Disruption is a key word. We have disrupted the natural balances that existed on this planet. I'm sure you've heard that by 2050, unless we change our consumption and our relationship to ocean, there will be more plastic than fish in the ocean. The ocean is not meant to be a plastic waste center. It's meant to be the home of fish. Right? So this shift is fundamental. And I've just listed here some examples of what we observe, right? Of the messages that nature is sending us. But we are not listening, or not listening sufficiently. The Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, said it very clearly. The climate change and the need for climate action is not an option. It is a life-threatening event. It is an issue of extinction of the human race if we don't take action now. These are very strong words, but real words. And COVID-19 and the millions of people who should not have died, but have died because of COVID, right, are testimony of those mistakes. I strongly recommend, and it sounds like I'm doing an advert, but I'm not. This is a public good. It's a Global Human Development Report 2020, available on our websites. The Thai version is just coming out of print, right? So it will also be available in print, not the full report, but the executive summary will be available in Thai on our website very soon. I urge you to look at it. It explains this concept of Anthropocene and should be at the heart of our discussions, because this is our future or our failure. So when we talk about this, simple, again, proof, right? This is the world's capacity, the global humanities capacity at making milestone progress on human development. And again, I'm not going to explain the concept of human development. I take it that you know about it. But as you can see, every year, with some years better than others, we are able as a global community to make progress. Thailand is a very good case in point. Since the beginning of the Human Development Index, it has constantly increased. Slowly, but surely, right? You can see the first hiccup on the road was the global financial crisis, right? 10 years ago, a bit more than 10 years ago now, right? Of course, many countries were hit, but if you see, it had an impact, but it remained positive. Look at COVID. Look at the dramatic impact of COVID on human development, right? So this, if we don't get that message right, I don't know what we need. right? But this to me is a huge alarm bell that rings not only when I have to wake up in the morning, but the whole day it keeps on ringing, because we need to take action. Now, the report, if you read it, usually provides policy recommendation. Given the Human Development Reports is an annual report of UNDP every year on a different topic, and it usually comes with policy recommendations, which are always extremely interesting and relevant. This year, given the ambition of the topic, we don't dare come with policy recommendation. I think it's too early to think that we know, right, what we need to recommend. But we have identified as UNDP 3 big topics that will be at the core or to make or break of this situation. The first one is stewardship, right? The quality of our leadership. And I don't only mean political leadership, I mean economic leadership, social, philosophical thinking leadership, humanity thinking, academic thinking, right? The leadership of those who are in a situation to take decisions that will impact the lives of the global citizens needs to be of the top quality possible. The issue of equity and the dark side of it, rising inequalities. And Thailand, unfortunately, is not a great student when it comes to reducing inequalities. We know, right? And COVID has just made it worse. But the issue of equity, ensuring that we provide less and less reasons for spoilers of peace. Again, peace, development, peace, right? Equity is a huge search, because inequality is what fuels most of the conflicts around the world today. Right? And the third one is what I want to talk about now, innovation. Right? And innovation in its broadest sense. So I like this quote here very much. We do not know what the future will look like, but what we know is that we need a great transformation in everything, in the way we work, in the way we live, in the way we cooperate. I think, this should be probably can be one of the conclusions. We don't know much, but we know that business as usual is not going to make it. It cannot be sufficient. And that's why innovation is at the heart. So what do we mean by innovation? What we have seen is amazing progress. Right? There's no question. The ability of the global community to lift people out of poverty, to make progress over the past millennium, right? Even the century, I mean, just look at the last century, has been enormous, right? And it applies to everything, right? This is the genius of humankind, right? But this is also, when it's not controlled, the problem, right? We are able to ski in Dubai. We made it because we wanted it, right? Progress. Look at COVID, the vaccine. Right? Less than a year, we have the vaccine to a virus we knew nothing about just a year ago. Right? So increasingly rapid progress in many, many, many areas that is applied to a wide range of sectors, right? To space, right? Our ability to go beyond our own horizons, renewable energies. Right? We are being able, in France, for decades, we've been able to make power, electricity, just from the waves in the ocean. Right? How can we transform this? Well, we found out how to do it. Right? Automation, artificial intelligence, robots. In every sector of society, we have seen amazing numbers of innovations and progress. And of course, it is very relevant to sustainable development. I was in Nepal in 2015, when a terrible earthquake hit the country in a very remote area where thousands of people live in communities. The roads were totally demolished. Right? Drones is what enabled us to carry medicine in those areas. Right? 15 years ago, we would not have been able to do that. Right? So that's just one example that I wanted to highlight that I've lived myself. Right? We use satellite imagery to do risk mapping in many countries around the world. This famous green belt in Africa. We're not going to send jeeps in the middle of deserts for thousands of kilometers. We use satellite imagery. AI. Recently, I saw this documentary, I think it was on Netflix, where you could see children in Japanese schools with AI, prototypes on their eyes, and they were living themselves a tsunami experience to learn how they had to, where they had to run, what they had to look at, what signs they had to pull, etc., etc. Right? Artificial intelligence for disaster risk reduction and awareness raising among children. Talk to people who unfortunately have lost limbs during a war or an accident, and the beauty of 3D printing. We are now able to create many objects out of 3D printing. So this is really very impressive, but, and this is very, very important, there's always a but, right? And the but is very, so I've talked mostly about technology, but innovation cannot be limited to technology. There's so many other areas where innovation. I will just give you, again, a reference that I would strongly ask you to go find. Look at this, because I think it's very relevant to NIDA and its work. It's an article by some of my colleagues in UNDP that talks about the big failure of small government. What we mean by that is that in public governance, right, we've used to say, you know, we need to reduce the size of government. We need to outsource, right? We need to privatize so many public services delivery. Maybe it makes sense from a cost-efficient perspective, right? But COVID-19 has shown that the countries that have been able to manage the health dimension of the crisis well are those that had maintained a strong sense of public-owned public service delivery. The amazing healthcare system of Thailand, with its millions of health volunteers around the country, that have been able to give the message of prevention, that have been able to do the tracking when there was a virus outbreak, right, is a demonstration that no, you know, small government is not only a panacea. It cannot be a panacea. It cannot be the solutions to everything, right? So the whole concept of innovation, you know, to me, it embodies, this article embodies a lot of what we want to say, right? Fast. I've talked about the speed of innovation, right? But let's not kid ourselves. Fast is not pointing towards a direction, right? We can go fast towards a solution. We can also go very fast towards a calamity, a catastrophe, if we don't know where we're going, right? So speed, right, and the excitement about innovation should never be surpassed by the thinking through of innovations and of solutions. This is a very important, very often undermined concept. This concept of equality that I was talking about, of equity, right? Access to innovation, the ability to participate in innovation, or the lack of, can also be, you know, also has a dark side, right? COVID-19, a great example, right? Online learning for schools. No problem in the international schools of Thailand. All the kids have tablets, all the kids have smartphones. But what about in Isan? What about in the hill in northern Thailand? What about on the islands in the Andaman Seas, right? Where there's very poor internet coverage, where tablets still remain an expensive object to acquire, right? So again, simple example to the point that innovation, you know, can also deepen inequality. The famous digital divide that we hear always about, right? Fundamental to keep an eye also on the social dimension, right, of an innovative spirit. And finally, and this is, you know, we could have a whole debate about this, but we are also very worried that, you know, this race towards innovation, be it on technology side or on social governance side, you know, very often puts values and ethical questions under the carpet because they become more complex. 1945, Hiroshima, right? The atomic bomb, the use of nuclear power. Yes, you know, great for renewable energy, but what do we do with the waste? How do we manage the waste and the health consequences of being close to people? And of course, not to mention the military use of nuclear power, right? Again, medical research, DNA, right? Our ability now to really look at what makes us humans and how we can fix it, right? By looking at micro issues in our organisms and fixing them even before they start developing into future illnesses or future issues that lead towards disabilities, right? But DNA is also about choices. We can also choose, no, give me a blonde, green eye, male, this height, etc., etc. Is this what we want for our societies? What is the consequences of this? Ask China, where they have to, I have to be careful how I say this, but where many stories refer to the need to import women to compensate for the one-child policy over so many decades, right? So a large debate around the value-based innovation and what it means, right? And this is where we have all this image, right, of the scientist locked up in a basement discovering something amazing but completely disconnected from the reality of our world, right? So it is a complex concept, innovation. In UNDP, what do we mean by that, right? This is where it boils down to what we do, right? As an agency who wants to promote sustainable development and who wants to do it and cannot afford not to bring in innovation, given the challenges that we're facing in complexity, in how fast they are evolving, and how deep they are impacting humanity, right? So first of all, we don't talk about innovation. We talk about inclusive innovation, a very important qualification. What do we mean by that? We mean basically two things. We mean, one, that it has to be innovation that benefits everyone, right? Not that deepens inequality, but that actually finds solutions first and foremost for the most vulnerable, for the poor, for the ones who do not have and who are as entitled as you and me to have, right? So inclusive innovation that benefits first and foremost those who have not. It's the concept of leave no one behind of the SDGs applied to innovation, right? A value-driven innovation. But it also means, and this is important, inclusive innovation means, where do we find the innovation? Where do we go and find the origin of the innovation? Not only in the labs of the developed cities or the rich universities. We also are open-minded to a lot of the lessons that we can collect from areas where we would be surprised. I was recently with an indigenous community up north of Thailand, and they were teaching me about rotational farming. The concept of rotational farming that has been, at the core of their identity, cultural identity, for centuries. And today they are showing that when it comes to food security or adaptation of agriculture practices to climate change, rotational farming is a solution. And, people in Bangkok call rotational farming an innovation. Our friends from the indigenous communities are laughing. They don't see it as something new. They've done it, but we haven't listened. We thought that, by land redistribution, big property, you bring in the tractors, you do monocropping, we thought that was the future. Today, we know better. Right? But do we have the courage, and this is going back to the value and the ethics and the policy, do we have the courage to, one, accept it, and two, mainstream it, upscale it? Right? That is critical. Very similar story. I was with a Moken group in Rawai Beach in Phuket. Right? Now that there's no tourists, we suddenly rediscover that there's a whole indigenous community, ethnic minority in Phuket. The Moken have shown me their fishing techniques. Right? Very simple, but very astute ways of building cylinders of bamboo, putting them in the water, and only the big fish get caught, not the small fish. The whole concept of overfishing, right? They've addressed it many decades ago, way before the EU came with its regulations and the Thai government issued regulations, etc., etc. Right? So this issue of inclusive innovation that benefits everyone, but also that looks at the origin of its solutions everywhere, and that does not differentiate and claim, to be more and more radical. We need to focus on systems dynamics, and this is again concepts that are extremely important to understand. Right? We need to start by admitting that we don't know. Right? And this is, I know this sounds horrible, especially for academia, right? But it is very important that a little bit of humility now kicks in when it comes to, the way forward, because, this predictability of thinking that we know everything, that as soon as we have a problem, poof, we have a solution. No. I think today we need to learn also. And innovation is part of learning a different way, right? And learning in a different way, not just coming up with a ready-made solution. And this is where, you know, sense-making, questioning the origin of our belief systems, right? Deep listening, going and taking the time, not coming to an area with a prescribed solution that we think can just be plugged in and be put, but listen to the community, right? Have the people identify themselves, what are the most crucial problems, and our role being more of a moderator, of a more facilitator, instead of just coming in with a plugged in solution. And this is very important, and it keeps on changing, and therefore it is also very much you know, all about rethinking a little bit the logic of our interventions. The third area is really to move away from single point to what we call coherent portfolios. Right? It goes back to what I was saying earlier about the SDGs. If you take 17 and you slice it, right, you're not going to make any progress. Well, the same thing is true for the way that we want innovation to bring solutions. Right? It's all about packages. Right? It's looking at a community and looking horizontally to the community, not starting to segregate, okay, all the doctors this way, all the lawyers that way, all the farmers this way, etc., etc. Right? Bring them together. Bring the intergenerational aspects. In Thailand, it is very, very important given the demographics. Right? We always say, okay, the young, you have nothing to say, you stay home with your tablets. The old, you know, go and play cards in the park. Let's talk to the middle ones, you know, the ones who are working today. Well, I can tell you, many of the problems are due to them. Right? And a lot of the seniors have solutions that sometimes we overlook, and the young people have a voice, and they will not accept to be shut up. Right? So unless we take, again, a much more horizontal approach, right, of portfolio solutions rather than a single entry to a problem, we're not going to go very far. That is quite for sure. The fourth element, right, and this is crucial, short-term solutions versus long-term perspectives. Right? Now, this is complex because I've said things are dynamic. Right? So if we take short-term, we'll maybe find a solution for 2 weeks, but then it's finished. Right? It's a bit the problem with the COVID vaccine. Well, we're very happy that we have a vaccine, but nobody knows how long it is actually valid. How long the protection brought by the vaccine will last. That we still don't know. Right? So for this specific case, it's actually a counter example of what I'm saying. Right? But then for health reasons, we need to move forward. Right? But short-termism is very, very important. Our time frame has to evolve. Right? For us, it's extremely complicated because when a donor gives money to UNDP, they want results overnight. Because they want to be, you know, they want to go back to the taxpayers and say, we've been able to help X number of people, and now we've solved the problem of X number of people. Right? But if we apply this different time frame horizon to problems, which the complexity of the problems and dynamic of the problems require, then unless our donor changed also, how are we going to do it? Right? Very, very important. And the same thing applies, you know, sorry to pick up on a university, but that's exactly the same problem with how we learn in universities. Right? If each year we want an exam to validate what we learned that year, and then we move to the second year, and we can almost delete, you know, what we learned the year before. And then we have to focus on that year's learning and have another exam, right? Very short term. But by the time we finish our 4th year course, right, who tells me that what I've learned in first year is still relevant, is still accurate in a world that changes so quickly? And not only what we learn, but how we learn is evolving so rapidly. So we need to really think through, you know, we call this life learning skills. We've all heard that concept, the future of work, right? Look at COVID. Look at how we're doing this webinar. I'm not sitting next to Dr.Thanaporn. I'm miles away in my office, right? But the result is the same. We are able to convey messages and learning and hopefully inspire people to look forward and look for more in depth in details of what we're saying. And the 5th point, you know, which many see as a bit of a small detail and an option, but to me, I think it's very important, right? It's a bit of walking the talk, meaning that, you know, creating papers, right? Buying bookshelves to put books in them, right, is less and less relevant. The idea of just putting ink on paper and thinking that this is knowledge, right, doesn't make any more sense. Right? It's all about experimenting. It's about failing, learning from the failure and rebounding. There's no pass or fail. Right? And this is also going back to university, a big lesson for everyone. Right? It's not about passing and failing. You can fail tomorrow, but you can pass the next day just because the questions will be asked differently. Right? So all those concepts of presentation, of the way that we communicate, of the way that we combine knowledge together and condensate and store it, right? We in UNDP now more and more think of almost mapping issues and mapping solutions that go with them, right? It's like the mind map, right? And usually it's always in at least 3 dimension, right? 4th dimension, then we get lost, right? But at least in 3 dimension. Right? And that's also very, very important. So those elements that I wanted to share with you on how we in UNDP do it. The last slides I just want to present to you, and this is more for the future, various tools that we have already running in Thailand that we can count on, right? In UNDP Thailand, in my office, we have a team that is called the Accelerator Lab. That again comes with a white piece of paper, listens to people, what are the problems, and start mapping, exploring, experimenting, solutions mapping through various techniques that I've talked about. Right? We have now convinced the government of Thailand and signed an agreement last year for a 3-year engagement under what has been called the Thailand Policy Lab. Very relevant, I think, to NIDA, because it is about not only what, but how. How do we conceive policy making today in Thailand when addressing those complex issues? Right? And very quickly, our first point on the agenda of the Thailand Policy Lab, which is this collaboration between UNDP and the government, and specifically NESDC, is to rethink local development, local economic development, very heavily tourist-oriented, of Krabi, Phuket, Phang Nga, post-COVID. Right? How do we develop? And the first thing that NESDC said is we need to go and talk to people. We need to listen to people in those 3 provinces. Right? They didn't say, okay, this is what we're going to do. 1, 2, 3, right? Bangkok deciding for those 3 provinces. No, it's about Bangkok traveling to those 3 provinces, traveling physically or online, doesn't matter anymore, and listening, learning, thinking. Right? We have the UNDP Regional Innovation Center, and we have in Singapore our global Center for Technology, Innovation, and Sustainable Development. So these are institutional resources that are available to all of you. Right? And I wanted to finish by this because this webinar should be the beginning, I hope, of an even stronger collaboration between NIDA and UNDP when it's about innovation and finding solutions for sustainable, a complex but fascinating area of work. And I hope I will have, if there is one message that I wanted to give to the student, is to keep them inspired. Right? And to really question everything, not accept everything because it's written, but really think for themselves, open mind, consult, debate, accept failure, right? Accept challenging your professors. Right? And if I had 2 options in my career. Do what I'm doing now or be a professor. Right? Sometimes I don't regret it, but sometimes I'm thinking I would have still loved to try at some point. But this is engagement, right? It's not about just passing in a one-way avenue. We have as much to learn from the young people in front of us than we do from our books and our science. So thank you very much. I've been, as always, probably over time and passionate about what I'm saying, and I apologize, but I really look forward now to debating and answering any questions and answers and clarification that you may have. Thanaporn, back to you. Thank you so much
for your fruitful contributions and bring so much dynamic voice to our conference. A lot of food for thought at the first session by Mr. Renaud, challenging us to take a step back and think hard about whether our approaches to achieve sustainable development and innovation are on track. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Renaud encouraged us to open to learning from mistakes and challenges. The common goal is not to rate performance, but also to better understand how to work together to deliver improved collective results. Right? For me, the innovation is important. just imagine for the next 5 or 8 years out from now, anything that cannot be digitized or automated will be extremely valuable. Like human-only traits, something like creativity, imagination, institution, emotion, ethics, or an intricacy will be even more important in the future because machines are really good at simulating, but not at being. So we need to go beyond technology and data to reach the human insights and wisdom. The skill and mindset required for successful collaboration is something we value highly. So I think, shall we take a break for 5 minutes and then back to the panel discussion? All right. Station.
คณะรัฐประศาสนศาสตร์สถาบันบัณฑิตพัฒนาบริหารศาสตร์จัดตั้งขึ้นเมื่อวันที่ 6 กรกฎาคม พุทธศักราช 2498 ในสังกัดมหาวิทยาลัยธรรมศาสตร์โดยมีคณาจารย์จากมหาวิทยาลัยอินเดียนามาร่วมวางหลักสูตรและดำเนินการสอนจนถึงปีการศึกษา 2506 ต่อมารัฐบาลไทยได้จัดตั้งสถาบันบัณฑิตพัฒนาบริหารศาสตร์ขึ้นเมื่อวันที่ 1 เมษายน พุทธศักราช 2509 โดยมีวัตถุประสงค์หลักในการผลิตและพัฒนาบุคลากรทางการบริหารการพัฒนาตามพระราชบัญญัติสถาบันบัณฑิตพัฒนาบริหารศาสตร์พุทธศักราช 2509 เป็นสถาบันที่สอนทางด้านรัฐประศาสนศาสตร์ระดับบัณฑิตศึกษาแห่งแรกในประเทศไทยและดำเนินการเรื่อยมาจนถึงปัจจุบัน
วิสัยทัศน์ของคณะรัฐประศาสนศาสตร์คือต้องการเป็นผู้นำทางด้านรัฐประศาสนศาสตร์สามารถผลิตมหาบัณฑิตและดุษฎีบัณฑิตเพื่อนำความรู้ด้านนี้ไปพัฒนาประเทศชาติ
คณะรัฐประศาสนศาสตร์นะครับปัจจุบันประกอบด้วยทั้งหมด4หลักสูตรนะครับในระดับปริญญาโทเนี่ยเราจะมีหลักสูตรรัฐประศาสนศาสตร์และก็หลักสูตรการจัดการภาครัฐและภาคเอกชนในระดับปริญญาเอกเราก็จะมีหลักสูตรทั้งหลักสูตรนานาชาติและหลักสูตรที่เป็นภาษาไทยนะครับคณะเองเนี่ยให้ความสำคัญกับเรื่องของการประกันคุณภาพการศึกษามากนะครับในปัจจุบันเนี่ยเราได้ปฏิบัติตามแนวทางอาทิเช่นของ AUNQA นะครับก็คือเครือข่ายมหาวิทยาลัยในอาเซียนนะครับ
นอกจากนั้นคณะรัฐประศาสนศาสตร์ยังมีหลักสูตรฝึกอบรมระยะสั้นเพื่อมุ่งเน้นการเพิ่มพูนความรู้เทคนิคใหม่ทักษะและความสามารถเชิงพฤติกรรมการบริหารและการจัดการที่ทันสมัยตลอดกว่า5ทศวรรษที่ผ่านมาของคณะรัฐประศาสนศาสตร์ทั้งในอดีตและปัจจุบัน ได้รับเกียรติจากคณาจารย์ผู้ทรงคุณวุฒิมีความรู้และประสบการณ์เป็นที่ยอมรับทั้งในระดับชาติและระดับนานาชาติที่ได้สร้างประโยชน์แก่ประเทศชาตินานับประการ
คณะรัฐประศาสนศาสตร์มีความภาคภูมิใจที่เป็นสถาบันที่สอนทางด้านรัฐประศาสนศาสตร์ในระดับบัณฑิตศึกษาเป็นแห่งแรกของประเทศไทย
เราสร้างผู้นำในวันนี้ให้มีความคิดอ่านที่ดีมีทัศนคติเชิงบวกเพื่อสร้างสังคมที่ดีกว่ามีคุณประโยชน์ต่อผู้คนในอนาคต
คณะรัฐประศาสนศาสตร์ยังได้สร้างผลงานทางวิชาการที่เป็นประโยชน์กับการบริหารและการจัดการขององค์กรต่างๆ
นอกจากงานวิจัยที่มากมายนะครับเรายังมีความร่วมมือกับมหาวิทยาลัยในต่างประเทศนะครับในประเทศด้วยอีกมากมายไม่ว่าจะเป็นทางด้านของฝั่งสหรัฐอเมริกานะครับในยุโรปหรือแม้แต่ในหลายๆประเทศในเอเชียก็ตามที่ผ่านมานะครับนักศึกษาของเรายังมีโอกาสได้ไปร่วมโครงการแลกเปลี่ยนหรือว่า Student Exchange Program กับมหาวิทยาลัยอื่นๆอีกมากมายนะครับก็ถือว่าเป็นเครื่องการันตีถึงคุณภาพการเรียนการสอนของคณะรัฐประศาสนศาสตร์ที่นิด้าของเราครับ
นอกจากนั้นคณะยังได้จัดกิจกรรมเพื่อเชื่อมโยงและรับผิดชอบต่อสังคม
สำหรับท่านที่เตรียมตัวจะเป็นผู้นำองค์กรทั้งภาครัฐและภาคเอกชนการเตรียมตัวที่สำคัญก็คือการเรียนรู้คณะรัฐประศาสนศาสตร์เป็นคณะที่จะช่วยเสริมและช่วยเติมสิ่งที่ท่านขาดเหล่านี้ให้
บางคนมองว่า disruption คือปัญหาแต่เรามองว่า disruption คือโอกาสที่เราจะเติบโตอย่างก้าวกระโดด
คณะยังได้ขยายโอกาสทางการศึกษาไปยังศูนย์การศึกษาทั่วประเทศ
เรามุ่งเน้นที่จะทำความเข้าใจกรรมวิธีที่ภาคส่วนต่างๆใช้ในการแปลงความชอบธรรมความเสมอภาคและประชาธิปไตยให้เป็นสินค้าและบริการสาธารณะส่งมอบแก่ประชาชนและสังคมโดยรวมค่ะ
คณะรัฐประศาสนศาสตร์สถาบันบัณฑิตพัฒนาบริหารศาสตร์เราพร้อมจะให้ความรู้กับท่านในสภาวะสังคมที่เปลี่ยนแปลงไม่ว่าจะเป็นหลักสูตรระยะสั้นและระยะยาว
โดยในปัจจุบันมีมหาบัณฑิตและดุษฎีบัณฑิตสำเร็จการศึกษาไปแล้วทั้งสิ้นกว่า 30,000 คนล้วนแล้วแต่เป็นบุคลากรที่มีคุณภาพสร้างประโยชน์ให้กับประเทศและหลายๆสายอาชีพ
อาจารย์สอนแบบไฮบริดใช่ไหม
สิ่งอำนวยความสะดวกที่ครอบคลุมทั้งด้านวิชาการและนันทนาการคณะรัฐประศาสนศาสตร์ยังคงมุ่งมั่นที่จะผลิตมหาบัณฑิตและดุษฎีบัณฑิตเพื่อให้เป็นผู้นำที่มีความรู้เป็นเลิศทางวิชาการมีความเป็นมืออาชีพและมีคุณธรรมเป็นผู้นำความเปลี่ยนแปลงเพื่อพัฒนาสังคมและประเทศชาติให้ยั่งยืนตลอดไป
All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to our panel discussion and Q&A session. And we have received a question from Zoom asking that, are there any changes in SDGs after the pandemic or post-COVID-19, new goals or new values?
A very good question. Yes, thank you. Thank you so much. No, good question. But I think, you know, if on one side you unpack COVID-19 and the root causes of COVID, and on the other side you unpack the SDGs as they have been existing since 2015, I believe that all the solutions are in it. Right? We don't need to reinvent anything. Whether you look at, you know, to me, what is fundamental is this relationship between humans and nature. Right? SDGs 13, 14, 15, which are the environmental goals. It's all about prevention of too much interaction between wildlife and humans. And it is about respect and creation of protected areas for wildlife. If we have this, then already, you know, if they have this achieved, the chances of zoonotic diseases jumping from animals to humans are significantly reduced. And then if you go to goal 3 on health, right? And you ensure that non-communicable diseases, meaning the overall, health status of individuals are increased, right? We know enough to do that, right? Tobacco, alcohol, diets, occupation, right? Meaning to not just sit in front of a TV and eat bad food. All those NCDs, can be really help increase our own immune systems and our ability, to resist to attacks from new viruses and new illnesses. So I don't think we need to really change anything in the SDG. What we need is to speed up the achievement, right, and the progress towards the goals. And here, unfortunately, if you just flip open the Thailand profile on our Asia Pacific progress report on the SDGs, there's a very, it's not famous, but we use it a lot in the UN to kind of raise attention. You will see where Thailand stands against each of the goals. None is on schedule, right? And actually, 2 on climate and on biodiversity are actually going backwards. So not only are we not on target, but even the trend is not good enough, right? And Thailand is just one among many countries, right? So we need more efforts, we need more investments, we need more mobilization, and we need more awareness. This is why I strongly believe that localizing the SDGs, right, is fundamental in Thailand. We need to put more efforts in this and to empower local governments, local authorities, local stakeholders and community to really own the SDG agenda and make effort at their own. And then it will have a trigger effect by upscaling, I think, significantly the overall progress of the country on the SDGs. So no need to change, but need to further deepen the success and the progress on SDGs.
Excuse me, Dr. Thanaporn, can I add a little bit?
Sure, please.
Yeah, thank you. All right, thank you so much. I'm Dhiyathad, right? I'm one of the lecturers at GSPA. Thank you, Mr. Renaud, for being here and give a very great lecture. I couldn't agree more with you. And I think in terms of the COVID pandemic, I think sometimes crisis bring together with it the opportunity. And the opportunity here, I want to talk about how can we actualize SDG, right? Especially the goal number 7 about partnership, right? And also, I think it is important more than ever that we start to seriously talk about the implementation at locality. Because nowadays, it seems that the concept of SDG is quite, in my view, only maybe quite a little bit of top down. How can we make it bottom up? How can we not only raise the awareness of the public, but actualize it in a good way, in a serious way, right? This is really important. And I also think that we can start by having a serious thinking and maybe a bit about the measures that can not only raise the awareness of the people at local level, but let them participate and let them join this force. So to make it happen in reality, right? Maybe I add a little bit just about the implementation and how local level can help to actualize the SDG as well. Thank you.
Right. Thank you, Mr. Meyer and Dr. Dhiyathad. And I think to build on from the comments, I really agree to that. I think the goals are there and it will remain there, right? However, it's after the global health crisis that we are facing, it's the matter of resource reallocations, right? And the formation of collaborative efforts and partnerships. And as Dr. Dhiyathad said, it has to be participatory and inclusive. I think one of the key aspect is to be able to adapt quickly right, with the changes that we are facing in terms of the crisis. Maybe there needs to be a more frequent periodic assessments, right, with all the levels, because the goals are there, but the strategies and action plans and implementation plans could be adapted, right? And it has to be adapted quickly to address possibly multiple goals at once. With this crisis, certain goals might get hit hard. For example, poverty eradication, right? With job losses, evident job losses in multiple sectors, aviation, hospitality, service. That will affect, household income and spending power drastically. So how do we come back to work together as a partnership to identify common or shared values before tackling, right? So that we can utilize the strengths that each sector brings. For example, the government, the public sector might have the infrastructure and the outreach through provincial and local administration, right? This is the key strength. The private sector might have the big data, the technology, research and development advancements, right? And the civil society, of course, they have the high level of mission attachment, right? The volunteers who are attached to the causes, right? And who would be willing to contribute their efforts and their volunteerism, as Mr. Meyer mentioned, right? These are the key strengths that each sector could form and could bring to the table, and then addressing these points, the goals.
Right. Okay. Another question from Zoom. They mentioned that there are many advantages of adopting innovation and technology, but such benefits come with the new challenges as digital transformation and innovation change the nature and structure of organization, markets, communities, and raises concern about job and skills, privacy and security, and the notion of equity and institution and inclusion. So the government, as usual, is dead, like you mentioned earlier. The way we work will never be the same, and the skills we need will be dramatically different. Our question is, how exactly should the core government functions, such as providing public services and infrastructure, human capacity, formulating and implementing public policies, and operating social programs, etc., be performed in both physical and digital world to achieve sustainable development? Mr. Renaud, please.
It's a very good question, and obviously a fairly broad one. So I won't go into concepts. I will just stick to what we do very concretely. And in UNDP, we've been working with OPDC for a few years now already on a GovLab experiment. And so with our OPDC colleagues, we've identified prototypes, right? And it's exactly about how do we mainstream, introduce, right, innovative approaches to public service delivery. Now, one of the first prototype that was implemented was to introduce the issue of patient handling, management of patients in public hospitals. Right? How do we reorganize, rethink from the moment they enter the hospital to, of course, the cashier, right? And the different steps, so that the waiting period, but also the efficiency of the service is increased, right? So it was a mix of course, a few technological solutions, right? The concept of taking a number, of scanning, et cetera, that we see in many private hospitals already in place. But also rethinking quality of service, rethinking attitude of staff of the hospital vis-a-vis the future patients or the visitors. And such prototypes, can really help because they demonstrate that they are feasible. I mean, and you learn and you address so there's you can apply that principle to just about every single public service delivery, right? And to go back to what the first professor Ditaya, I'm sorry if I pronounced the name is Dhiyathad, sorry, apologies. What you were talking about localizing, that's exactly this is key, because when you localize, right, you increase your understanding of the problem of the community, right? And instead of them just being passive spectators on the side of the issue, you put them at the core, right? So it's about them identifying the problem, them identifying solutions, them testing different options until they tell you that suits us, that will work, right? We cannot be prescriptive about this, right? And what works in Chiang Mai may not work in Khon Kaen, right? For many different reasons. And actually, it doesn't matter what reasons. What matters is whether it works or not, right? So the concept of centralizing everything, right, and being top down, I think is a concept of the past, right? But we need to be open-minded about this, and we don't need to see this as a threat to authority. Right? It is not about questioning the need for public service delivery or the need for having an authority behind it, right? But it's a way of really opening up on the implementation, right? And so digitalization of public service delivery, and a lot of the work, we can do it. So with OPDC, we're doing this. The challenge is, of course, for this not to remain an OPDC solution, right? Now, together, we need to then convince, local authorities, Ministry of Public Health, and the Ministry of Finance for additional investments, of the value of those propositions, and they not be seen as a little detail on the side of the road. Right? So, top down, fully agree. I mean, we need to really, really shift that. But it is very much, and then it brings other benefits, right? It brings transparency, right? It contributes, to fighting corruption, because there's less temptation, right? And with concepts of open government, are very, very important, and that's also another benefit of digitalization. Not only do you increase the efficiency, but I think you also increase the transparency and the accountability of those transactions. So it's really beneficial, but again, we need to apply those concepts of deep listening, of understanding, of mapping, right? The solutions, because sometimes there are impact and consequences that go way beyond what we had initially predefined in terms of references, right? So this approach to flexibility and openness is crucial to the success of such interventions. Thank you.
I would also like to respond a little bit. I think if we're going back to the question about digitalization, I think it is really important. Really important digitalization, because right now, if we want, for example, economic growth or anything like that, yes, it is one of the answers. But also, we shouldn't lose sight of the societal innovation, which is, for example, I'm a passionate believer in social enterprise, and it is very, very good in line with sustainable development. And I think we also should emphasize on something like this as well. I think it should be parallel, not only digitalization, but sometimes you need societal innovation, social enterprise, or anything like that. All right, thank you.
Thank you so much. For me, I think transparency, accountability, and two-way communication that digital technology makes possible to put citizens' right at the heart of the service design and help government work on behalf of citizens in ways that's responsive, efficiency, and fair, and can help restore trust in their public institutions as well. All right, I think it's time for today. 11:30. Thank you very much for coming today. My thought of the day, another takeaway for me is the threats are global and cannot be addressed by the only one country or only government, only civil society or private sector alone. It is vital that we work together to achieve sustainable development and innovation. So I'm certain that this forum highlights with the beneficial state-of-the-art strategy which can positively impact the journey of the sustainable development. And we highly hope that our successful dialogue would offer new ways of the governments to serve and interact with citizens for their better life. All right, thank you so much for today. Thank you very much, Mr. Renaud. Hope to talk with you
again
soon.
in the future. We have more collaboration with UNDP, as GSPA is one of the leading public management school in Thailand anyway, and we are emphasizing in terms of sustainable development. So we hope that we do a lot of collaboration in the near future.
Very much open to this, and thank you very much to all of you for having me and UNDP as part of the program this morning. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.